Shalom, we all face tests in life, and I think the best biblical paradigm model for testing occurs with the greatest spiritual personality of all time, Abraham. Now, the rabbis, Maimonides and Rashi, disagree exactly of the specific of the 10 tests he faced, but the Talmud says he faced 10 tests. And I think if you read the Torah portion during the week in which I'm filming this, which is parshat Lech Lecha, which is Genesis 12 through 17, you'll see many tests. And I just want to describe some of them for you and have us think about the tests we face in our lives and the challenges from this story and the advice from this story that perhaps we can gather. It begins by God saying to Abraham, whose name was Abram at the beginning of the story, his name gets changed later, to leave everything he knows, his father's house, his land, and go to a new land on God's promise that things will be better. He's not guaranteed a better job, not guaranteed a better housing. He just on faith have to leave and go to fulfill God's promise. And then he's got to face the test of convincing his wife, Sarai, whose name is changed to Sarah later, to go with him. Quite a test. And then there's a story that occurs 3 times in Genesis, twice with Abraham, once with Isaac, dealing with the moral challenge of what do you do when your life's in danger because you approach a king who, now we don't have the exact same situation today, but it's an interesting situation, where you approach a village or a town and the king of the city-state will want to kill you, perhaps, because your wife is beautiful and will want to take the wife into the harem. And so you have a moral quandary, and so what the patriarchs did in each case was they tried to say, okay, go ahead, take her, she's my sister, Abraham says about Sarah. And God didn't like what was going on, so God made it impossible for the king to do anything wrong. And the king then realized what was happening, was angry with Abraham, and it doesn't seem to be a test that Abraham passed very well. And then you got the story of how money affects family dynamics, because Abraham and Lot, his nephews, herdsmen, were quarreling because they were arguing about the best grassland. And the way Abraham resolved it was to say to Lot, this is chapter 13, listen, Lot, there's plenty of land here. You take what you want, I'll take the rest. I'll take the balance. Trying to avoid a fight between family members, not let money break up the family. And then you have in chapter 14 the story of where these 5 kings of these city-states kidnap Lot, and Abraham has to decide whether he's going to endanger his life to go rescue his nephew, which he does. And then in chapter 16, you have the story of Hagar, his concubine, because his wife Sarai is barren. And God has promised him in chapter 12 and in chapter 15 that he's going to have a people, a great people named after him. And you see the problem of having more than one woman. Hagar gets kicked out of the house here, and then again in chapter 21, which we read next week, the Torah portion, but it's also read on Rosh Hashanah. The problem of having more than one woman and why in 995 the Ashkenazim were prohibited from having more than one wife. You also have 2 very special experiences, one in chapter 12 and one in 15, where God makes a promise to Abraham, and that's a very important verse there. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you in Genesis 12. Then in Genesis 15, you actually have the covenantal experience of Ben Abitarim with Abraham and God. And then Abraham faces the test of believing God because he's supposed to be the founder of this great people and he's got no heir. Now, we're going to read in Parshat Vayera where Isaac is born. In this Parsha, Ishmael is born to Hagar, but he's not going to be the heir of this great people. And then in chapter 17, Abraham is 99. And God says to start things off, you have got to circumcise yourself. Couldn't have been a pleasant task. Abraham does it. Circumcises Ishmael at the age of 13. That's why certain communities, they circumcise their boys at 13. It's not until next week, when we read about Isaac being born, that the commandment is to circumcise him on the 8th day. Now we're going to have other tests that occur in the subsequent portions of the Torah, like when God says to Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham argues against him. And Genesis 22, the most famous test, where it actually says Abraham is tested, Adonai Nisad Avraham, where God says, take Isaac, the son you love, and take him and kill him, which Abraham is willing to do until God stops it. So we have all these tests that Abraham, this genius of religious faith, takes, having to leave his home, having to worry about his life versus his wife's virtue, about not letting money interfere with his family, about rescuing his family member in trouble, believing in God's promise even though his wife was barren, about the commandment to circumcise, all in this one Torah portion. He faced many tests in his life, just as that we face tests, all kinds of tests. And sometimes, through no fault of our own, we face very difficult challenges. I think the key here is to understand Abraham's absolute faith in God, his understanding that what he was doing was right, his enduring and persevering and pushing through, and making a life, the best life he could for himself. Ended up being one of the great spiritual personalities of all time. And so we need to learn to face our tests, to pass them, but to keep the powerful mindset of a one God who loves us and wants the best for us and encourages us, even though sometimes we feel like the hand that we're dealt is not the best hand, but there are challenges to be met. Beautiful Torah portion, a beautiful life lesson.